Now we've reached a really interesting point in our project, because if I open up the menu and I navigate over to the About page, well, I can kind of see that the page changed behind the menu, but you'd expect this menu to close and show us the new page. Instead, I actually have to click the exit button or close the menu by clicking back here so that I can see the new page. And that's going to be a little bit confusing. So let's take a look at how to fix that with Vuex and ViewRouter. So what we're looking for here is a way to detect if the page is about to change or if the page has changed. And if the page has changed or if the page is about to change, let's close the menu. It turns out that ViewRouter actually has something for this. So if we go over to the docs, ViewRouter has navigation guards, and we can make use of a global resolve guard, which fires right before the navigation is confirmed. So that's perfect. That sounds like exactly what we're looking for. And we can register a resolve guard by adding before resolve onto our router. So let's copy this and let's take a look at how to implement this. So I'm going to go over to my router. And if we take a look at this file now, you can see that we're exporting a new router. And this is actually being exported to our main.js file. So we're making use of that import up here. And then we're using the router when we mount our Vue app down here. Now, as a side note for something that's going to come up in a couple minutes, we're also importing the Vuex store and making use of that when we mount our app down here. All of this was set up for us when we originally set up the app with the Vue CLI in the first tutorial. So what we want to do is we just want to change this router a little bit so that we can make use of the before resolve method. So let's add that in down here. And in order to actually use this, we're going to have to change this to be a variable. So I'm going to say let router equal new router. And because we're making use of this in main.js, we're going to have to make sure that this remains an export. So I'm going to export the router down here. So now let's take a look at using this resolve guard. So what we want to do is go back over to the documentation, and I'm going to scroll just a little bit up the page, and you can see that every one of these guards receives 3 arguments. So we've got to, from, and next. So it kind of looks like this, right? And the next function is really important because this must be called in order to resolve the hook. So if you make use of one of these methods without actually calling the next function, then the hook is never going to resolve. So let's just copy paste all of this, and we'll paste that down here just so that I don't have to type it. And if I were to save this as it is, you'll notice that our router view doesn't even render anymore. So if we go back to about or home, it doesn't really matter. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to render. And that's because we just broke the page. So what we need to do is make sure that we return next, and that will fix that problem. The next thing we want to do in this before resolve guard is make sure that we close the menu. But the problem with that right now is that our menu is based on a local state variable all the way down here in the header component. So it's not really accessible from the router. So how do we get around that problem? Well, it turns out that if you've ever got something like our router and a component, or maybe even multiple components that need to make use of the same variable like this, that's a very good example of something you want to put in a Vuex store. So let's open up the store.js file over here. And this is our Vuex store. Because this is a state machine, the rules around how we use this are actually kind of strict. So let's take a look at converting this variable over here to be a global state variable in Vuex. So I'm going to copy this, and we're going to paste this into state. And I'm going to also set the default value of this to be false. Now, just to be a little bit more specific, I also actually want to change the name of this variable to show menu status. So now we have a variable in state that both our router and our header navigation components should be able to access. But if we ever want to change the state of the menu, we need to have an action. So we need to be able to call one of these actions, which in turn calls a mutation, which changes the state variable. So that's the tricky part about this, is you can't just change one of these variables directly. You have to call an action, which calls a mutation, which changes state. So let's create an action here for let's actually create two actions. So we'll copy the two that we have. And I actually want to change these because I don't want to have a toggle menu. I actually just want this to be an open menu and a close menu. And this should set the menu to true, and this should set the menu to false. But as I said, actions cannot mutate state directly. So if we want to change state or change a value that's in state, we have to call a mutation from our action, and then the mutation can change a value that's in state. Let's take a look at setting up a mutation. So what we want to do here is create a new mutation, and I'm going to call this set show menu status. And what this is going to do is it's going to change the status of our show menu status variable. So we need to accept in two arguments. We need to accept in state, which is this state up here, that whole object. And then we're also going to accept a value that we want to set this variable to. So this is going to be status. And then I'm going to just open up my curly braces, and that's exactly what we're going to do here, is we're just going to set state dot show menu status to the status that we pass in. And now that we have the mutation set up, we can make use of that in our action. Now, in order to make use of a mutation, we're going to use a commit. So we have to set that up as an argument over here. And now we can commit something to our mutation. So let's commit. And the first argument on our commit function is the mutation that we want to use. So in this case, I want to use the set show menu status mutation, which is the only mutation we have. And I'm going to pass this a value of true when we want the menu to be open. So when we want the menu to be open, this is going to commit set show menu status a value of true. And that value of true is going to come into here, and then that is going to change it in state. So we're going to pass the value true from here into our state variable. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for close menu, except the only change here is we want this to pass through a value of false. So now let's take a look at using these actions in our component to open and close our menu. So what we're going to do is go over to header navigation, and I want to refactor the toggle show menu method to open menu. And I'm just going to make sure that I change that up here as well. And now when I call this method, I actually want to call the open menu action in state. So to do that, we're going to say this $store dispatch. So it's called dispatching an action. And then we're going to just give it the name of the action that we want to dispatch, which in this case is going to be open menu. And then we want to do the same thing for close menu, except we want to dispatch the close menu action. And now when we call the open menu method, that should set this variable to true. And then when we call the close menu method, that should set the state to false. Now we should actually have a broken menu. So if I try to open up our menu now. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be working. And that's because our menu is based on this data here, which we don't need anymore. Instead, we're actually going to be using the value in store. So what I want to do is just make a getter so I can quickly access this variable in state. So let's set up a getter over here, and let's just call this show menu status. And what show menu status is going to do is return the method that's in state, or the variable that's in state. So let's just return state, and that's going to be state show menu status. Whoops. And now we can go over and use that in the header. So this is going to be store.getters.show menu status without the parentheses. So if I save this as it is and we come back over to the browser, we should now have a working menu again. And that's great. But the entire reason we went through all of this effort is so that we can modify that variable in the store. So now, or in the router rather. So now we can finally call this store dispatch in our router. And I actually need to change the syntax here a little bit, because it's not going to be this $store, it's going to be store dispatch. But we also need to import store from over there. So that should import the store. And now when we open our menu and navigate over to the about page, the menu should close, and the same thing if we navigate back to the home page. Pretty cool, huh? And before we end off this video, I just want to say thank you for watching. Pause the video now. There's a bunch of things that I'd like you to do, so read the text on screen. I'd like you to join the channel, buy the merch, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.